In 2002, when I headed off to seminary about 17 years ago, one of the first people I met and befriended was a young man who had grown up Catholic and had actually gone in and been in Catholic seminary for a time to be a priest until his sexual orientation got in the way of that journey. But he was a very devout and steeped in the ritual of the Catholic tradition. And here I was, having grown up with my hippie parents, only attending worship on Easter and Christmas, deeply called to ministry, but really having absolutely no idea what that form might be. I was really drawn to him and his understanding of the externals of worship and liturgy, the beauty that they held. And he was very interested in Swedenborg and interested in what I would share with him about heaven and the descriptions of what heaven might be like. And I asked him one day in his tradition what he had been taught heaven was like. And he said, well, we'll spend eternity praising and worshiping God. Now, with my limited understanding at that time, I listened to him and thought, that sounds like hell. That for eternity, we're going to sit in pews and sing songs and worship. What about all the other joys of life? What about running and dancing and playing in nature and being with others? What about laughter and humor? Is it really just going to be harps and singing and praise? Now, worship, this practice of externally expressing our devotion, our faith, of looking up, is something that has been central to human communities since the beginning of time. I would venture to say that at the first emergence of consciousness within those first human beings that began to be able to imagine the future and reflect on the past, that there was within them an impulse to worship, an impulse to experience awe and want to express that awe in some way, whether that was looking up at the heavens, at the skies, and crying out. Maybe it was tears. Maybe it was kneeling, the very ancient practice of bowing down. But there was, my strong belief is that there was something in even the very early human being that needed to express that awakening understanding that that original person was a part of something bigger. That there was something bigger going on than just our individual survival instincts and needs. And so from that initial impulse, the practices and ways of worship have evolved and changed, grown and been codified and solidified. In large part because that initial instinct, while arising within the self, I believe also draws us to one another. We want to give thanks and look up in awe with others who are giving thanks and looking up in awe. We want to reach out and we want to do this together, and so we need to find ways to do that in common. We need to find common places to worship, common words to use, common songs to sing, common ritual and practice, so that we can be together to do what is really a very simple and primary act of recognizing something more than ourselves. Now, as this impulse to worship has been solidified and codified over time, we get the history of the world's religions. Religions that have then become the language and the practice of worship for entire cultures of people. But what about where we are today? I found it very fitting that as we began our worship service today, it was just Denise and PJ here in the sanctuary. As we start talking about worship and gathering worship, we have to acknowledge that many people in the world today choose not to worship in these traditional forms, within traditional churches, within traditional hours of worship. Liturgies that for much of our history were a given as the way of worshiping God. You learned from your parents what that worship looked like, and you took part. But now we live in a time where freedom is much more widely spread, it's much higher in our minds and our thinking. And we are in a time where we recognize the importance of internal worship, I would say much more than the importance of external worship. I would guess if we went and did a little survey at all of the cafes serving brunch right now and checked in with the people there and asked, do you believe that there's something more than just you? I would guess most of them would say yes. I would guess that most people are at least seeking to live lives beyond themselves, seeking to remember that they are not the center of the universe, and finding ways to look up and to be drawn out from their own individual journey in a myriad of ways. Swedenborg pointed to this, and he in some ways laid the framework for how this was going to be how people were going to, the direction we were going to move. He was writing during the Enlightenment when the way we think about things was really raised in its importance. This was a period of time where many scientists were kind of giving away and stepping back from religion because they wanted facts. They wanted things that they could prove. And Swedenborg pointed to a movement that was happening, he believed, around the globe, where people were going to be worshiping and expressing that worship, and needed to do that in their lives, more so than within a church just like this. He didn't say that these churches would be abandoned, but that the first dimension of worship, the true and real dimension of worship, is that inner devotion. An inner devotion and a life of kindness. That unless we are oriented towards kindness and towards love and towards the neighbor, unless we have that inner devotion, then all of this pomp and circumstance that we're doing in this chapel will probably not mean very much. It probably won't feel very good. It'll probably be very foreign. There's a particular quote that we often see within Swedenborgian circles. When we live a life of love and kindness, our life is continual worship. Swedenborg writes that, and many people within our tradition have lifted that up, have affirmed that, and some people say that's why we've always been so small. We don't lay out a path, a specific external path that will get you where you need to go on your spiritual path. But instead we point to the inner journey. You'll note that many of the famous people who've been influenced by Swedenborg over the years, who've dedicated their lives to living by the doctrines of this church, did not join the institution. Helen Keller, who we devote our series to, she died with a Bible at her bedside and a copy of Swedenborg's True Christian Religion on the other side, and yet she never joined the institution. Henry James Sr., whose famous psychologist son William and novelist son Henry, he traveled the globe always with a giant trunk full of Swedenborg's writings. It was a part of everything that he did, and yet he did not join the institution. Both lived by this doctrine that when we live a life of love and kindness, our life is continual worship. But how about the fact that there are still churches up there in heaven? How about this description from Swedenborg today that in heaven there are church buildings, there are people who do gather and worship, there are preachers like me talking about the word, sharing insights, much more eloquently and wise than myself. In our reading this morning, we heard that this is because angels, just like us, are continually being perfected in their ability to love and to be wise. That this journey of learning that we are on here on this planet doesn't end after we die. It continues. And that learning and growing in our faith is a part of the heavenly life. And it's actually a part of our worship. In heaven, just like here, it is the inner experience of those gathered in worship that has the primary importance and meaning. And yet there is a need to express that inner experience. There's a need to be with others who are expressing that as well. There's a need to worship, just like that initial impulse I shared about that first emergence of human consciousness. And there's something, as far as we go along this path, there is something that we really miss if we make this an intellectual journey instead of a lived one. I know in my younger years, I really loved this quote, that when we live a life of love and kindness, our life is continual worship. I loved it, I lifted up, and it was my reason for not going to church. I didn't need these external forms. I wanted to explore deeper levels of the experience. I wanted to explore all of the ways I could go out and do good and how that would be worship. Now, some people may be able to do that without the trappings of church or the trappings of ritual and tradition and practice. But I am not one of those people. And I would argue that most of us need some kind of rhythm of our day, rhythm of our week, rhythm of our year, where there are intentional moments when we step aside and look up. And then if we try to just live our lives of worship through action and activity with others, the weight of all of that work, the many temptations to start to believe it is all about us and our own inner journey and not about a source greater than ourselves, will begin to weigh us down, will begin to keep us apart from one another, and will keep us not looking up as high as we could to our Creator. That even though the options and the opportunities and the possibilities of worship are very varied today, the choices are limitless, and many sanctuaries like ours are not as full as they could be. That we are all looking for that worship, we are all looking for that external manifestation of worship that meets our inner devotion, that expresses our inner devotion, and that we are doing a service as we worship and as we provide these opportunities for others. Sometimes I think the amount of choices that exist in the world today, even though I am a huge proponent for freedom, but sometimes so much freedom can become oppressive. There are so many churches to be a part of, so many worship experiences to go to. Maybe I'll just choose none and go for a walk. This is what many people are doing today, and I believe God is in that as well. But for those of us who are starting to really move in this inner devotion, those of us who are really feeling the truth of our connection to one another and the truth of God, I believe God is providing for us the means to express that, the means to worship. And while it may feel overwhelming, the amount of choices and the desire to get it exactly right, perhaps if we just stop, like those early people who just stopped and put one stone upon another and said thanks, perhaps if we just stop, we will find the community where we can express the inner devotion of our hearts. And that place, that experience of worship, however imperfect, however only one of a myriad of possibilities, will express and meet the devotion of your heart. Will help you to look up on a regular basis. So when you're out there living your life of worship, of charity, of goodwill to others, you remember that quiet moment. And let us trust and hope that all others are finding those quiet moments. And let us not lift up worship as a external necessity, that if you're missing it in life, then you somehow are not worthy or not really getting it, or not as holy as the rest of us. But instead, if we want to welcome people here, if we want to invite others to worship with us, let us do it because of the joy we experience, because of the goodness that we have found, and our desire to experience that goodness with one another.